Welcome everyone to the Talga Group Quarterly Investor Webinar. Today we're going to hear from Talga's Managing Director Mark Thompson about the group's recent updates. Following Mark's presentation, there will be a Q&A. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question ahead of time. You can also submit a question during the presentation through the Q&A function on Zoom. As we've received quite a few questions, so if we don't get to your question, then feel free to get in contact with us at info@talgagroup.com. I'll now introduce Mark Thompson, Managing Director of Talga Group. Over to you, Mark.
Hello, good morning or evening wherever you are. So welcome everyone to the webinar where we're trying to catch up with you all. It's been a while about our activities with a focus on what's been achieved recently and where things are going. We'll be recording this today, so there will be an opportunity to go through that later. And we're also, of course, going to be taking live questions coming in today that you can submit, and the ones that have come in, the hundreds of them that have come in by email, and they have been collated and they'll be getting read out and dealt with. So first of all, I'll step through the presentation, then we'll have plenty of time for direct Q&A. All right, so for those of you that are relatively new to Talga, we're a European-focused supply chain of batteries and advanced materials is what we're building based on graphitic products. The difference, I get asked about the difference between Talga and others talking about similar things, is that relatively few people building, looking at producing anodes or past producers are vertically integrated. We've got a really special graphite source. We own all of our processing tech and have been scaling that up for a long while. And we're located in a jurisdiction that's very close to our customers. So we capture the full margins of the battery process. So we're very much a clean technology company that spans battery materials and other materials, but includes the product technologies themselves. A bit of an overview on how things are going. Obviously, from a share price point of view, the past year in particular has been really volatile. But I guess if you look at peer comparisons, we're doing pretty well. We have suffered less than some, and we are looking forward to the next the future. Market capitalization is just over $400 million today, Australian. Still only got 300 million shares on issue, which for a 12-year-old company is considered not bad. Cash is $13 million end of last quarter, which I'll speak about extensively later on as well. I'm the largest shareholder, still, along with some classy, what I would say is Australian and European institutions and high net worth investors. We've got just under 12,000 shareholders. The top 20, it's too hard, frankly. A lot of people got used to us publishing that regularly. It's published less often now, but it certainly hasn't changed much at all recently. It's been mostly retail flows in and out. Just to remind everyone that we've got a diverse board that includes some automotive experience and some that are based in the Nordic region, but also to point out some of our lead executives as well. Melissa Roberts has joined us as Chief Financial Officer from Iluka Resources, an extensive background, and we're thrilled to have Melissa and her experience in a multi-billion-dollar company and her past and her skills going forward. Per-Erik Lindvall is the chairman of Talga AB, our local subsidiary there. He's based in Sweden, very experienced businessman there who's of great of great value to us. And we continue, but behind the scenes, there is actually teams of both management and staff that you don't get to see very often. So just a reminder that they out there, it's not certainly all about me. We've got nearly 60 employees now across our operations, which have been extensive as we've grown. We have got, obviously, the mineral deposits are up in North Sweden. This is where the graphite deposits and the anode production is. In Kiruna is where the mine is, or near where there is the Vittangi project. And in Luleå, we have the anode project. We also have Cambridge is the extensive product and R&D technology centre, and we've been developing our production processing equipment in Rudolstadt in Germany for some time now. We also have staff based out of Japan and Hong Kong, both on the sort of sales side, but also product development side, where we've transferred a lot of extensive vendor testing we've been doing on equipment over the years and have now transferred that into Europe. And this is managed from our group head office, which is in Perth, as we're listed on the ASX. A lot of people talk about ESG. I would argue that Talga is, it's been a part of our framework for a long time. We're quite and towards so managed systems as well. But frankly, things haven't changed that much over the years. The mining of graphite continues to take place in different parts of the world, but the downstream processing capability of turning it into anodes for lithium-ion batteries is actually entirely still focused in Asia, predominantly in China. So it's got a very similar strategic deficiency, really, in the supply chain, similar to rare earths and to a lesser degree lithium and some of the other battery chemicals. But it's actually worse. I mean, it's right up there with rare earths for being a problem. And this is recognised by the EU, the USGS, and a whole bunch of other governments, including Australia, which is that it's a critical mineral, and it's required for a bunch of clean technologies and a huge role in decarbonisation that is not that is only just becoming more recognised now, frankly. So let's talk about specifically for batteries as one of those applications. It's not traditionally the largest one, but it's now becoming so. And the graphite's role in batteries has not been that well, I guess, demonstrated in the media, but certainly in the industry, it's massive. It's the largest single volume of mineral in a lithium-ion battery. It forms the anode, which is sort of the sponge. So when you charge a battery up, that's where the energy actually gets stored within the graphite and then comes back out of it. When you use it, it shuttles back to the other side. Importantly, all of the major the commercial rechargeable battery systems use graphite predominantly as the anode. And while there are small incursions of things like silicon, coming in, at the same time, the overall growth is so large, the growth in graphite is really large. So compared to lithium, compared to nickel and other types of metals, it's very consistent across the entire market, across the demand, and it's large volume. It's been relatively low cost, like it's traditionally about 10% of the cost of a lithium-ion battery minerals, and therefore it's had maybe a little less attention, and it's been thought to be widespread and easily available, but with prices going up based on supply issues as well as growing demand, that is soon to be changed. And what's driving that is electrification. Predominantly, it is battery use is driving that mega trend of batteries is driving, and in mobility is driving the new demand for graphite. So today we're sort of on the way up this incredible growth curve that is actually exceeding most people's forecasts now. If you go back a few years and look what they looked at for 22 and heading on for 25, some places like EV growth in China is actually above where it was forecast to be. So everyone's used to these big hockey sticks, and everyone projects things up and up and up. But actually, if you look back on where the forecast, we're tracking above actually a lot of those projections. So things are looking actually better than normal. And that's without counting in stationary 3C, which are like consumer devices. Stationary markets are also very big, and everything's electrifying. But mobility, which is not just passenger vehicles, but cars and trucks and things like that. Trucks, buses and ferries and all sorts of large mobility applications, even aircraft, they all are driving more and more and more demand. And to be honest, it's probably more demand that's being recognised. Everyone thinks, these graphs are all very, positive and optimistic. frankly, from what I've seen, they're underselling what's going on. And you're seeing real sales data come in that supports that. So what's it doing for graphite? Well, normally the natural graphite market's only about 1 million tonnes per year, and in a 2 million tonne per year total graphite market, which is half synthetic, roughly half natural. But that's split up across all these different industrial products. In batteries, all the existing and new capacities using graphite anodes. So while you will read lots and lots of media articles about new technologies, frankly, a lot of them possibly will never happen, or they're many, many years off, could be decades off, or maybe, yeah, as I said, never happen. Similar to in the past, things like lithium air. So while you read about lithium sulfur, lithium aluminium, sodium batteries, and so forth, all the commercial scale stuff, the terawatt hours of battery capacity being built now is actually all based on graphite anodes. And there is a trend towards more natural over synthetic, partially driven from the lower environmental footprint and a perceived lower cost and improvements in fast charge. But in reality, it's about rising energy costs. Synthetic graphite takes weeks of cooking at very, very high temperatures, so it uses a huge amount of energy, never mind the original fossil fuel component that makes it up. So essentially, synthetic graphite is a proxy, or energy prices are a proxy for synthetic graphite trends, if you want to look at it that way. So when you get higher energy costs, you've got higher synthetic costs, which means that natural graphite looks like a good and scalable option. In the past, natural graphite was, fairly rough, I would say. If you spend the supply chain was, material coming from lots of different deposits, getting processed in certain ways and ending up in batteries. But if some of those deposits close and you get material from somewhere else, the quality can change. And overall, it was a sort of almost accidental development where the whole concept of spherical graphite, spheronization in natural graphite, and purification was just getting it done, but it hadn't been optimized. No one had thought about it from an efficiency sort of point of view. About, is there a different way to do it? And I think you're seeing that now. So we, amongst others, are capable of making synthetic quality results with natural material. That hasn't happened before. So there's a bit of a revolution in industry underway where people are realizing that it's not as simple as saying natural versus synthetic. This is just the old way of thinking. What you've got to do is look at the particles and look at the performance. And when you do that, people are saying, actually natural has a big role to play, a bigger role in anodes than it had. Traditionally, probably only 50,000, 60,000 tonnes of graphite was going into lithium anodes, probably 5 years ago. And now it's just rocketing up where you'll need at least 4 million tonnes of natural anode globally, over the next couple of decades, and probably a lot more. Now, remember, that too is the finished anode product. That doesn't mean tonnes of graphite. If you want to take tons of flake of natural graphite and smash them up to get these sorts of numbers of anode, you need tens of millions of tons of natural flake graphite, not ore, to make this sort of material. So using standard technologies. So it's a revolution in the industry. It's a massive disruption of a 400-year-old industrial supply chain, which is now entirely having to reform itself around battery-specific things. And we're just in the early stages of that. We're in Europe specifically. This was all, I guess, designed originally was find a great deposit, find it somewhere where it's going to be really useful, and then get it set up so that you capture all the margins for what would be a lot of growth. Europe currently imports 100% of its materials pretty much for natural graphite for anodes and for the battery production capacity there. So they have to go from 0 to 1.2 million tonnes of anode, which could be a mixture of natural and synthetic, but they need 1.2 million tonnes of graphite anode per year versus what Talga's stage 1 project is 20,000 tonnes per year. So you can sort of see the massive demand curve. Now that's only up to 8 years away. And some consider that conservative. But the point is that battery makers worldwide, both existing and new startups, are all flooding into Europe as the huge growth area. China is also a large volume market, but it's also fairly established. North America, obviously a very large potential growing market, maybe in some ways more constrained in the total number of players, but big volumes. But we're specializing in Europe where we can drive literally within 1 or 2 days, we could drop our products off in customers' factories directly So that's pretty attractive. So within that European sphere, Talga's positioned itself and it's already been invested many years, as some of your shareholders well know. You've invested in building the largest graphite resources under JORC and I-43 standards in all of Europe. And it's by a long way. Now, while there are larger deposits in tonnage, they can have lower grades. So you've got to look at how much contained graphite do you have that you can turn into the equivalent amounts of anode. And there's 7.8 actually terawatt hours per annum of graphite contained, in total, sorry, not per annum. And that's significant. So we're far and away the largest resources. We're the highest grade resources there. I've visited the other large historic deposits like Zaveloyskoye in Ukraine, some of the historic deposits in Germany and Austria, and they're small high-grade deposits. They haven't been drilled out to JORC or NI 43 standards. It's not to say that they won't be in future, but from my review of them, either if it's small and high grade, if it's really high grade, it can be too small. If you can be big, you're commonly low grade, and that's the beauty of particularly Vittangi. It's both big and high grade at the same time, and its total scale is still yet to be revealed. But certainly, it's a dominant position of owning a bunch of graphitic carbon that you can then turn into a load of products, and it can get a lot larger. So now let's get out of the endowment or talking about the company generally and get stuck into the project, the Vittangi Anode project, which we've completed a DFS on last year. It really stands out by being because it's high grade, you can have a very small footprint. So you can have a very responsibly mined, 100% renewable powered natural graphite mine integrated with a downstream refinery to make the final anode product, which goes to customers. These are the battery cell makers and all the autos who are doing that. And it's within a few days' drive. So back a few years ago when we had to start the permits, and actually I was reminded this morning by some of our people that it was in 2017 we first engaged our lawyers in Sweden we initiated a study on how the Mining Act itself was working and how the permitting was progressing and how we should do that, and also talking to early stage customers, looking at how we should enter the market, what sort of things should we do. And we targeted a certain amount of anode over at least a minimum of 20 years. And of course, today that looks way too small, but at the time we thought that was a good way to start and enter the industry and looking at the capex and so forth. That included mining of 100,000 tonnes per year of ore, which is very small, but it does enable us to design the mine around mining just for half a year, processing for all the year round. And that allows the place to operate in a very responsible way to the local stakeholders, and then downstream produce about just under 20,000 tonnes a year of actual final anode product. So that's the project, and it's not just a mining project. We have to talk about mining a lot because under JORC rules, ASX rules, ASIC rules, there's a whole bunch of rules. We have to, every time you talk about something to do with the deposits, the graphite deposits, it does require a lot of disclosure around it. With the downstream refining, a little less so, but of course the problems there is we do have proprietary technology in there, so we're a bit restricted in what we say, and of course we have non-disclosure agreements with our customers, so right then it becomes a little tougher to talk about. But the refinery has been well proven at different scales. So if you look at that project, I guess the point is if you look at peers that sell anode today, Mitsubishi Chemical, Hitachi / Showa Denko now, POSCO, BTR, Zichen and others, they don't necessarily own the full supply chain. They just do the downstream coating and they buy the raw materials from someone in China, for example. So you get a purified spheronized product from China at a certain price, and then you'll coat it and you'll put out the final anode. That's where the big margins are. So we capture all of that. By mining and concentrating ourselves up in the mine and then purifying, shaping and coating that into a final product, we're able to control it. We have a lot of security. That's very attractive to auto customers in particular who are looking at entering into fairly long-term contracts like 5 or as long as 8 years or more, was for long-term planning as well. So that control is very good. Last few years of disruption in supply chains and geopolitics, this project development now is now in their minds as much as it was in ours when we started. So it's become more valuable, I would say, out in that world. So just a bit of a recap on what we've been doing in the last while, which is why we've probably not been seeing you, or I haven't been seeing you very much. We've been pretty busy. It's that time when you're doing lots of feasibility studies. The life cycle assessment was big as well, but setting up the EVA plant's a bit of a big deal. I mean, that's a $25–30 million coating plant, the first to be built in Europe, as it turns out. And there's a lot of operational and quality and skills parts to that, to do that as part of our process. The trial mining last year, and now we've just started again this year. The environmental permitting for the mine, everything to do with the mining permitting has been huge as well. We've been drilling and exploring to continue building our resources. Why is that? Well, that's because we've got to think ahead. You know how long it takes to go from a resource to a development. So you have to line things up in a sequence over time. And more recently, heading into the finance process for the mine, the offtakes, the so-called offtakes, they're really purchase agreements, improving the quality of the what we're financing. So on the CapEx side, the way we'll build the mine and the details, the value improvement process and the front-end engineering and design. So they're all being done in parallel, and they're not, it's not accidental. It's all designed to come together. The financing and the customer agreements coming together, ready for and subject to the final permitting, so that everything, all being well, will line up with starting construction next year, so not far away. Regarding the EVA, it's turning out to be a wonderful facility for people to visit, never mind anything else. We only finished it late March, and it's been operating and now scaling up. It's producing what it needed for big customers. So for smaller volumes, people can operate from our existing facilities that we've been producing Talnode C from, which is our flagship anode product. That's the backbone of the project. That's been, for some customers that build phones, laptops, even drones, and the things in that sort of 3C market, they don't necessarily need more than, say, hundreds of kilos before making a decision to be able to enter into contracts. But the automotives do. Automotive quality control is extremely high. It's near aerospace quality. And as part of that, the larger customers in particular not only audit you as a company, that you have to become a registered supplier, which can take over a year or 2 years in some cases with really big groups. They audit the heck out of you. And then they have to audit the product and your processes. So there's an actual regulated step of sample sizes that you have to go through. And the last stage is that the Talnode C has to come off commercial style equipment. So it has to represent what your production is going to be. So this is, just to be clear, this is not meaning to be expanded to be a commercial production center. This is for making the large scale samples that the customers, the automotive customers need. And that's why it's the electric vehicle anode plant, not just the anode plant. And it includes the quality controls and the battery laboratory. So we test our anodes through making actual batteries out of them. And there's a bit of technology center there as well on the process side, obviously. So customers are visiting this and seeing how it works and what we do. And it's really helping that process as well, as of course the samples then form the final part of their decision making in their process, where they're testing your material against some of the previously mentioned companies' anodes, and they are making their decisions on are you qualified for them as a company, but then they have to nominate you for specific models. And if they're not the automaker, if they're the cell maker, and in that nomination, then that's getting you locked in. You have the price negotiation, the volume negotiation, so they're underway. Now, I'll talk about all that later in more detail. So what are we making? Talnode C is actually different material. It's got quite surprisingly high energy density naturally, and a lower cell resistance through the natural way the material was formed. It's got a really strangely high crystallinity and relatively small particle size that we use for faster charging, helps with cold temperature performance. And the faster charging is not to do necessarily for charging your car, although I have seen it 20C. We've published before some results at up to 20C charge rates, which are very high and not. But there's also specialist applications we're seeing up to 50C, and we just spank it out of the park, to be honest. So this is really useful material by itself, or for blending with other synthetics, or to get whatever is the formula you want for your vehicle. So, for example, in a very small passenger car, is very different to having the material that you want for a bus or a truck. They've got different cycle times, different charging requirements. So there is a lot of bespoke work around blends getting it's a targeted spec. It doesn't mean you have to change your product necessarily, although you can tune it and optimize it to some degree. Most anode companies have got a range of products, but the final product, if it's a blend, is a formula to meet a spec. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a standard Chinese natural spec you have to meet if the customer uses your material and they really like it. So anyway, Talnode is a bit special, and it's a bit special in its life cycle assessment too. It's extremely low. This data is current as of end of June, as I've been reminded recently. But yeah, the bottom line is that the existing supply chains of anode are really dirty. And look, I'm glad that everyone is starting to do life cycle assessments. They'll all be done a bit differently in different ways, but over time, it doesn't really matter. It's just more, you're getting a new wave of graphite providers, and the world needs all of us, frankly, for the battery demand that's out there, to not slow up the industry and not slow up that electrification. And the focus on ESG, but particularly on emissions, cleans up what is currently a very dirty supply chain. So, we're part of that. We probably have got the ability to have much lower numbers. We're actually going to be reviewing and doing some more work on this in the second half of this year, because about 85% of our emissions are from downstream suppliers. So we've got a lot of optimizing we can do, but the bottom line is it's super, super clean compared to incumbent materials today. Just a word around commercialization. I know that, again, it's a frustration that comes through in questions from people. Where's the offtakes? Where's the deals, etc.? It's no accident that it's taken this long. It's nothing to do with our material not working. We're very restricted in what we can say. But we also, as you can see, if you read the DFS carefully, there was a projection around prices increasing, which is turning out to be the case. And it was always going to be the case that the longer you go, the better your deals and the terms are going to be honest, and the industry was going to start getting more and more, I shouldn't say desperate, although that is starting to happen with some customers. Anyway, so the point is, anodes are very different to metals like lithium. If you've got a rock with lithium in it, or cobalt or nickel, if someone downstream promises to purify it enough, someone's going to buy it. It's traded either on the LME or it's very visible. Anodes are different to that. So it's harder for people to do a deal on a graphite operation towards an anode production. As we've seen with other groups, it is starting to happen. But why you haven't seen it happen in the past is they've believed, one, the customers believe that they can get it any old time, which turns out not to be the case. Two, the testing process for anode to qualify for doing the real deal, the purchase, the actual sales contract, not just a sort of promise to buy material in future, but actually lock something in a little bit more binding based on your test results, is a multi-year process for automotive. And we've been doing that already, and the EVA is the last part of that. So the production now is finalising. So we expect that, given the market dynamics, we're very well positioned to optimise agreement terms, shall we say, as was the start of my spiel. And we're quite advanced in discussions on a range of commercial agreements with autos, although frankly not a lot of autos make their own batteries, but so it's more important to have deals with the guys that are selling them the batteries. And a lot of the autos have formed coalitions, as it were, with group buying and trying to work it out, because they don't commonly own their own supply chains. So it's something new to them and difficult for them. So yeah, it's a tough business to get into, but once you're established, the key players will be pretty big. And outside Asia, this is the first significant fully finished coated active anode material that we know of being produced in Europe, and now we've just got to expand it. So that's the model, and that's what that's what we're doing, and it's going very well. But certainly where we're at now is perfectly positioned and is working out as we took the risk to do, and we're building ourselves for long-term growth. We don't just want to have this short-term, kick in the share price. I know everyone else does, but we don't, because we've got to build the business. And so you've got to be very, very careful about your partners and the sort of deals you're cutting on this, because they can last for a long time. The financing strategy, Belvoir have come on board recently. They were very familiar. They're very familiar with the battery industry, both through working for other parts of the metal supply chain and the graphite supply chain, actually, but also in the lithium space in the early years, particularly with Pilbara Minerals. We've appointed them because it's a time when, compared to a few years ago, you probably didn't expect to be able to get any debt for the project. Graphite and anode making and stuff, while you guys who are sophisticated investors, no doubt, and looking ahead and obsessed with thinking about positioning yourself for what is this megatrend in batteries and being a part of that and being a positive part of the electrification story. A lot of banks and everyone else they were behind. They didn't necessarily get it. They've got to learn about it, and it was new to them. And while lithium projects and cobalt and everything else were being very well publicized and a lot of information, and have gone through 10 years of boom cycles where they could learn about it and come up to speed and finance projects, and there was heaps of research out, there actually was very little on graphite or anode. So there's been a bit of a learning process, and that holds things up like that. So, but now they've come up the curve. So it also gives the opportunities to go from very much a project equity sort of finance strategy to a more, should we say, standard model, where you've got access to debt, particularly looking at export credit agencies, development banks, and these financial institutions in Europe to get really cheaper opportunities for the finance for the project. And then you'll have a gap that we're looking at, similar to what we went through last year. Not too similar, but there'll be a smaller gap that has to be that we're looking at a strategic partner, and they're looking at equity. And when we say equity, we mean predominantly in the project, not necessarily in Talga itself, and towards really long-term growth. So the ability to help expand the project and the ability to maybe grow across not only Europe but outside Europe. And as part of that, we've been really thrilled to have the support recently from the Swedish Export Credit Agency, government institutions funding with a focus on funding of Swedish projects as part of decarbonisation. Also, Swiss Export Credit Agency and supporting ABB, who are major partners on the project, the Nordic Investment Bank. And we're still working with some other pretty significant European investment banks and European export credit agencies, and beyond to get the best deal. But certainly the critical mineral labelling of natural graphite in particular is important. And the European Investment Bank, amongst others, has put aside, a lot of development funds. So it is true that there can be some criticism about the EU being a bit slow and talking, but not a lot of talk, not much action. But I would argue that in recent times, relatively recent times, that started kicking in, and that's where we're trying to work. So there'll be a combination of commercial and government institutional sort of support, I guess. Another subject we'll go through in detail in the question time is around permitting. We're quite thrilled to show that, get the trial mine underway this year, showing that you can actually get permits in Sweden for mining. That's something that, is a small section of what we're trying to do on a bigger level. We were at the end of June, the objection period closed after a multi-year process we've been following. Importantly, for people to understand that we're not suffering at the moment. While we would love the Swedish system to be more prescribed and have these specific timelines and every sort of timeline being stuck to and things being met, we actually, we put our permits in after years of surveys, and then you put in the permit expecting to have years of permitting time. That's normal. That's what's happening. There's been no specific like knockback or something that's fall over in that process. It's just that you never know exactly when things are going to happen until you find out when they're going to happen. So it's a non-prescribed process. But we were quite pleased at the process culminating in the end of June, in that the statements from the Norbotten County Administrative Board found, who are the main, I guess, one of the main providers of authorities in the permitting process, found that in a 24-page statement that the mine could be approved, or the environmental permit could be approved with appropriate conditions, which importantly are pretty much all conditions that we had provided already. So whether, again, we'll come into that maybe in question time, but things like partial year mining, that was actually what we proposed. This wasn't imposed on us. These were all things that we designed into the project because we thought they were good ideas. We thought that they would help with the process, and it turns out that that's the case so far. And the CAB found that that if you change those conditions and do things a certain way, they found that the project could be approved. So what's happening next is there's a site visit by the court, which is so the environmental court. It's an environmental court is the process for getting to a decision. The site visit forms the start of that final process, and then the end of that is in Q1, likely in February, when the decision would be taken on the environmental, and that includes the Natura 2000 permits being decided together, and then followed by the exploitation permit decision by the what's called the Berristarten, which is the Mines Department. There is a lot of misinformation out there about that process. There is sort of the way the Act was designed, and then there's the policies that were enacted, and there were two major decisions, both at Norah Carr and the other one with Boliden's Laver project, which changed that. And so historically, you did exploitation permits first and environmental permits sort of last, plus or minus Natura 2000 if you had to. As I said earlier, in 2017, we started looking at this closely and working out strategies that continued to change and respond with what was happening in Sweden. And that led to us putting in all of our permits together at the one time and allowing the sort of cross-linking of the information. And technically, we did not, we found from our environmental surveys, the project is not in a Natura 2000 area, but there was potential for obviously any sort of runoff or discharge to eventually reach a drainage system that could affect it. So we were requested to put in Natura 2000. We did that shortly thereafter. And basically, the environmental permits for the EIA have gone in together for all intents and purposes, and they're now being decided together as well. And what used to be the case, where the Berristarten and the Mines Department would issue an exploitation permit first and the environmental last, the Laver decision actually stopped that. And so it's currently the other way around now, where the exploitation permit can only be issued if the Natura 2000 permit has been decided, which is decided by the local environmental court as well. So essentially, they're all sort of clustered together now. And we expect, therefore, the decision on the final commercial mine permitting to be decided in the first half of next year. If not, it's currently scheduled to be in the first quarter. At the same time, though, we have put in exploitation permits for the Niska expansion, and we've also put in permits for the anode refinery, which is located on land that's been demarcated as industrial land. It's been developed by the local authorities as an industrial site, as a chemical site, or as an industrial manufacturing site. It's next door to the steel mill, and so what you've got there is a very different permit process to the mining, and so there's a multi-stage process there going on, where it starts at one scale and then goes to another over time. But yeah, that's working well. So just again to point out, we're not here. Other companies have had problems with permits because they've got maybe very large developments they want to do up in the mountains in very sensitive areas and they've done things in certain ways that were the old ways from 8 or 10 years ago. I would say Talga's been a lot more proactive in trying to meet all the local stakeholder and authorities requirements and thinking in a modern way about the way it should go about it. And we have put the best case there. And yeah, the discussions we have and where we see things at and how it's changing is probably better than the commonly perceived view of the Swedish wine industry. Now that may change over time, but at the moment we have reason to be confident in the way things are looking for the permissions to be able to do something with construction next year. So I'm getting the hurry up. Trial mine, okay. Pads for waste and ore and topsoil to go back on after we rehabilitate it. Exposure of the graphite. This is Niska South next to the road there. You can see how shallow it is. You can see the high grade when you hit it with something hard. Actually, if you just hit our outcrops with a hammer, they go all chromy and shiny. You can actually tell pretty much everything that's going more than 30% that way, and just go around through the countryside for 15 Ks doing that. And of course, at the same time, it gives us a great opportunity to measure dust, measure sound. We've done all this before over the years, by the way. There was no measurable dust in the trial mines in 15, 16. But this is great data to get and show as part of the process. And this all will go off and be will be toll processed through GTK, our toll concentrator, and then come around with purification and come up then to EVA and be going out to customers in their marketing and the marketing process. But yeah, it's a pretty significant scale development now this year. So we're thrilled. There's a time lapse here, which I'd be shocked if it actually runs. Oh no, we might be able to. Oh, there we go. It's probably not going to run through Zoom, but anyway, there'll be a video. We'll make sure that works in the video of this recording that we'll upload of the thing. But anyway, there's a time lapse there of how things are going. But what you can see there is the general landscape. It's land now that we've come to agreements with the landowners for purchasing various rights as you can see, it's an area that's all it's logged. It's been logged for hundreds of years, yeah, it's not a bad place to operate, put it that way. Now, obviously, we have to be responsible with sharing the land with other users, but that should be pretty good. So I think things. Oh, there we go. My audio's breaking down. It's not been a great summer, to be honest, in North Sweden. It's been pretty cloudy. It's been rainy. It's been quite a wet, not very happy, sunny summer so far for this week. So anyway, there will be some details on that. Excuse me, I'm just going to swap audio because I think it's breaking down. Sorry.
Okay, can you guys still hear me?
Yes, Mark, we can hear you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm giving the hurry up to go into question time. So look, you can read about the project development plans and expansions and time. I just want to mention about graphene. We obviously used to in the early days be very much graphene focused. It isn't our main body. Yeah, we've got to get the project built, which means you've got to finance it, which means you've got to do deals that stick. You've got to have that. This is pretty serious development. And unfortunately, graphene commercialization didn't get to the point where you could do that. You could not fund the total scale of the development you would need of the refining and the mine to do it. However, on the upside, it is that we haven't lost those skills or stopped. We actually still have programs today using graphene. In fact, there's quite a lot on, both still in concrete for strength and conductivity. The famous SHIP, the biggest graphene application in the world, but we've expanded that to anti-foul coatings as well as powder coatings we've done work in. The silicon anode, Telnode SI, uses graphene from the project. And we've got some new programs running, Faraday-funded programs in the UK, looking at making graphene from graphite from recycling of batteries. And importantly, an expansion from the anode side into the cathode side of the market, replacing carbon black. So with our superconductive material, basically replacing, targeting Imerys's famous Super P product and other conductive additives across the battery. And the beauty of that is that when you make the anode materials, anything that's a bit either out of spec or is too small or too big or whatever it is, but we can now turn that into turn into graphene products as well, adding the scale of the markets we're addressing and adding some money basically into that business. Just a little bit on graphite on the resource side, why are we still growing? I just want to point out that the current DFS and the current sort of economics that you're seeing are only based on the yellow part of this big blue section you see here. The big blue area represents all that graphite ore bodies poking out of the ground, or most of them. And this is just in the Vittangi project. The red represents the resources we've drilled out so far, the JORC resource. And then the yellow represents the ore reserve, which is only the bit that's in the DFS currently. So that 20 plus years of about 20,000 tonnes of anode is actually based only on the yellow section. So you can sort of see the potential open cuts over time and open cuts in the short term and underground over time. It's pretty big. It's over 15 k's long. We've only drilled a fraction of it. So why are we doing this? Well, we've got demand now for over an order of magnitude our planned production. So to be responsible to plan for this in future, the Niska expansion would take us up to a total of 100,000 tonnes of anode, and that's all covered within resources, but only over 14 years. So we want to extend that mine life past 20 for the Niska development, but we also want to see how large the project can go. Again, constrained by the market, so with customers, but if the customers the demand is there for we can look at expansion options to get where they need us to be. So yeah, there's plenty of scale in front of us. So don't think that anything you see in the resource world is locked in stone, or it's not the end of years and years and years of exploration. That's all we've got. In fact, it's really just we've only ever drilled out the little bit that we want for any particular study, to be honest, and for any particular development. But now we're taking a bigger, longer term view because it takes too long. We've got to get it organised now. We've got to do the drilling now, to develop the resources now, to keep expanding for those, to work out what those plans should be, how big it should be in its maximum scale, and whether the local people and authorities want to support that, get all that sort of, it comes from the ground first. So we have to define what's there for the first time. And that's what we're doing now with the recent drilling, super high grades as normal, up to just under 50%. I think the highest grade now in the drilling in the last few years has been between 50 and 51%, but wide zones up to 100 meters of about 20% now in the Niska Link area, which just follows around that ring. But most of those always have high grade cores to them, and the average resource grade, if we go a bit bigger, it might come down a little bit, but frankly, there's high grade zones that you can prioritize in your mining plans, so it doesn't really change what your production schedule may be improved. So there's resources coming up and more drill results coming out. It's the Northern Hemisphere summer, of course, so you've got really a couple of months where everything up there slows down. So the drill results following up from the last ones we released are proving a bit slow. As you can tell, I'm always excited about exploration, and I'm not even talking to you here about the non-core assets, but they are there. Upcoming catalysts then. Okay. Even though there's spits and spurts, things build up. When we're quiet, it's because behind the scenes, when we're quiet in the public arena, it's because behind the scenes a lot is going on and being achieved, and then it'll come out when it can. The feed process optimizing the project takes into account increases in the last 12 months of pricing for things like steel, copper, things like that. They would have blown up CapEx quite a lot. I can talk about that in question time too. So what we've done is go through a process of looking at optimizing things to get to try and make that up and try and get the CapEx back down for that, to finalize that as part of the financing. Not because it was a problem, but just because that's what you should do. And that's going well. And we're being very conservative in that, I would say, and very successful at the same time. Very, very happy with what's going on commercially. Sorry, we can't talk about it, etc. And it'll just all come out slowly, but everything you'd like to happen, is sort of happening behind the scenes. And when we can, we will, announce the deals that are being done. they're getting, they're as advanced as we possibly can and can extend deep into including the financing of the project. So that's the stuff coming up. So what I call the three horsemen of the apocalypse: permitting, which is getting pretty close to the end of that now when it comes to the decision-making dates and stuff, and the court addressing it is pretty soon. By Q1 23, you'll actually have, at the moment, they've scheduled that's the end of the court process, and when a decision is made, the financing, which goes very much hand in hand with all the offtakes, the purchase agreements, and behind the scenes continuing to grow and continue to expand, and certainly that's going really well. You can come see us soon. We've been getting back on the road again, coming out of a couple of years of pretty strong restrictions on where you can and can't go. But both myself and the team have been back on the road. Myself only very recently, around the world. Been in Florida, been in Germany, been everywhere. And what's coming, as you can see, is in Norway. You can see us in Wolfsburg in Germany. For if you want to go to a dive on automotive. All being well, I think that's in like Los Angeles as normal, some of the west coast of the US. But yeah, keep an eye out. We'll try and we try and release what we can. A lot of these groups don't allow the videos of our presentations or anything to go out, so we just end up with a PowerPoint. And frankly, if the PowerPoint's exactly the same, pretty much similar as something, I go there. Anyway, so I'll shut up now, if that's okay.
Thanks, Mark, for the presentation and updating everyone on the group's activities. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion of today's session. We had quite a few questions, so we'll just try to move through these at a fairly brief pace. So thanks to everyone who did submit a question ahead of time or through the Q&A. If we don't get to your question in our limited time, please feel free to get in contact with us at info@talgagroup.com. So, Mark, the first question, well, we had multiple questions submitted regarding cash and capital management. Could you please speak to how management is planning to ensure operating and project development costs are met over the next few quarters?
Well, to a degree. Obviously, we're not here through accident. There's been decisions made based on what's going on commercially, and we have plans, and we have things that we'll be able to tell you when we can, but we can't talk in detail about that, obviously for market sensitivity reasons. But certainly, as the largest shareholder, as people may know, we tend to try and be minimise dilution in the company by, if the share price is high, we can do some equity. Share price is low, we do very little. We're at a time when the company is looking at options for moving into project finance, which maybe start becoming a part of our funding of the company going forward. But that's okay. We didn't want to do something rash when times were pretty rubbish over the last 6 months. So yeah, we're happy to try and we're happy to develop things based around what we've got. So yeah, you'll just have to. There's nothing in detail I can say about it other than we have, we have plans, and we have no intention of stuffing things up now, should we say?
Okay, thanks. A question that was submitted over the Q&A. Are Chinese anode suppliers subject to the same rigorous product qualification and auditing processes?
Technically, you'd have to ask the customers that, but yeah, to a degree. I mean, they're very keen to put stuff out there with very low pricing to get the work, and a lot of them are existing producers, so they don't have to carry, adding, the capital of building a new project. And they're also probably quite concerned with, a lot of with players that could take market share, and so they want to sort of be a certain way. But so I'd say that they're attractive on a cost basis. They're very unattractive on a time of delivery basis, on a quality basis, and on a CO2, like emissions basis. But yeah, that's partly why it's so attractive to have this opportunity, this vacant space provides the opportunity in Europe, and it's quite hard for anyone to argue that they should be importing those materials if there's a good alternative.
Thanks, Mark. Prior to the webinar and during the Q&A, we've had quite a few questions on Talnode SI commercialization and solid state batteries. Would you be able to give a brief update on those two areas, please?
Solid state, the silicon anode technology is developing really well. There's multiple generations of product of different performance coming along. We don't talk about it much because we've got quite a lot of tech in there, and you always keep getting spreading ideas around and concepts for other people to play with or have breakthroughs. But it's going really well. We've done some studies that indicate that we can be a really, really low cost provider of silicon anodes, and the performance is really great. So I would say we're one of the few with a really, truly large volume, like scalable way of heading into big amounts of silicon, always as a minor additive to the graphite. What can I say? I think we'll just have to. It's being tested extensively by some customers, including tier one automotives, and they're pretty interested. And there's a lot of discussions around what to do and how to build that business. So it's just getting really strong. And look, we'll just have to formalize things when we can. I can't say too much without getting in trouble about it. Sorry. And same thing with talking about. There's so much value in that. It won't be recognised in Talga. Well, maybe it can be if we play it right. It doesn't have to be spun off and to create that value. Talga shareholders have paid for the development so far, and I'd like them to be fully exposed to what'll come out of it. And it makes sense because it's integrated with our graphite production anyway. So you get the graphene components for the silicon anode from the mine, from the Talnode seed production. On the solid front. Solid state gets a huge amount of interest. It's going through a real wave, big pushes. It's still got fundamental problems. I actually saw Stan Whittingham recently was down in Australia along with Jeff Dunn and others for the World Lithium-Ion Battery Conference, which is only held every couple of years. And he was saying, look, you guys should be more responsible for the things you say to the media and the public about solid state. That's just seems like it's going to be driving around cars in a couple of years. And here's a guy who's won the Nobel Prize for the development of lithium-ion batteries and works in solid state. And he says, look, we might not crack this for 10 years or maybe another 10 years. We may never crack it. And even if we do, it may be restricted to really niche, boutique, small volumes, because it's probably going to be expensive and or difficult or impossible to transport the materials. So we're playing it. We're not putting a big focus on it because it's not going to, if we thought it was going to overtake everything and swallow everything as hard, then sure, we'd be going gung-ho on it. It's a really good product. It's waiting for the customers to realise that some of the other lines of inquiry they've done it wrong, and they'll work it out and realise what they've got to do if they want to get most of the performance without necessarily going to full lithium metal. So yeah, it's still under development, but it's layered up. As we publish things, Talnode C, SI, the cathode additive, frankly, is even more applicable and faster. It's got a current existing market than solid state. So we're still working on it, but it's just not a priority.
Thanks, Mark. So we've just got about 5 minutes left. So we'll just try and get through 2 final questions. Would you briefly be able to touch on an update on the development of the Niska expansion, and including whether we'll be working on a PFS?
We probably will do a PFS, but whether it's in the current scale or a different scale to follow a scoping study, I'm not sure, to be honest. Based on the continued contact with the customers and the demand curves coming from them, we may have to revisit the scale of Niska and how it gets built and what Niska is. I can't promise that it goes straight to a PFS. There might be another scoping study that looks at a change to it. So we'll see. We've got to balance all that up. What was the other part of that question? Sorry, something about where it's at.
Just the general state of the Niska expansion.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you just keep proceeding the way it is, it's all fine under exploitation. Then we keep filling in the resources and converting them to reserves around that process, like a PFS to DFS, etc., to lock all that in and co-develop it. But we're not far away from having Nunusvara South as far as a permitting decision and development underway. And so it would, I think, behoove us to go through that process first and use what we learn from that to possibly optimize and improve the Niska expansion, if valid. If not, it'll keep powering on. Right now, it's not time sensitive from the point of view of the permitting process is what you're waiting on, not the customers and everything else. So yeah, it's developing.
Awesome. Sounds like an exciting time. So we're basically at the end of our session. So just one more question. What are your top priorities for success over the next 12 months?
Well, killing the three horsemen of the apocalypse. I mean, we want to get a positive permitting decision to start working on the project, to start construction, financing, obviously not just for the whole project, but maybe something early so that we can get lead items. I know some people are concerned about equipment, where's it come from and so forth. Some's from Europe, some's from Asia, but yeah, we have got a long relationship with a lot of vendors about getting that. But financing will feed those early stage items getting going to be ready. So that's all lined up. We've thought about all those things. And then on the so-called offtake side, yeah, the purchase agreements and the deals being done with our customers for the material, not just now, but from the expansions and through the rest of the back half of the decade, and finalising those and getting them out. So we intend getting all three of those major issues that hold people back, or are considered major catalysts for Talga getting completed in the next 12 months. So I don't think we'll be having these same conversations then.
Great. All right, everyone, that's all about we have time for today. So thank you, Mark, for your presentation and time answering the questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We tried to answer a lot of the questions through the presentation. However, if we didn't get to your question that you may have submitted beforehand or over the Q&A, please feel free to submit it to info@talgagroup.com. Everyone, keep an eye out for our next quarterly investor webinar, which will take place in early November. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.